Hello, welcome to For Audacious Living. My name's Heidi Rubio. I am a wife coach and spiritual growth mentor. I help women understand what God's design is for marriage so that they can live it out and have a thriving marriage while also helping them understand what it looks like to break generational chains spiritually and to engage in spiritual warfare. So today I just want to chat with you a little bit about what it looks like to take marriage inventory. So oftentimes we go through marriage and the day-to-day life causes us to put our marriage on autopilot. I've done it. I'm sure most wives have done it. Most husbands have done it. But there's something a little deeper when it comes to our marriage and putting it on autopilot and how that can actually cause splinters to arise and us start to miss things in our marriage. Why inventory of our marriage is so important. So, when we go to put our marriage on autopilot, it's so easy to do. So don't be too hard on yourself if you've done it, because we all have. But here's where I want you to do. I want you to recognize it. I want you to recognize when you do and pull back from being on autopilot. What does autopilot look like? So being on autopilot in your marriage is allowing busy schedules, housework, jobs, careers, all of that to take precedent and not giving yourself time to unwind with your spouse, to have that quality time with them, to have conversations with them past the everyday conversations of what are the kids doing, what the kids have done now, what's happening at work, what we have planned, what the schedules look like, what needs to be done for the cars, the home, the next holiday, birthdays, etc. That's autopilot. Just leaving it as it is, leaving it to just kind of happen, because marriage doesn't just happen. If you truly want a thriving marriage, it doesn't just happen. And so, being on autopilot is kind of like that, where you're just going the day to day just to get through and thinking it's going to be fine. We're just in that season. And sometimes there are those seasons. However, when we start to think of it like that is when we really allow autopilot to continue or just take over. So what does taking marriage inventory look like? So taking marriage inventory, there's 7 really important areas of our marriage that we need to inventory on a normal basis. Monthly is a really good way to do it, or if you're starting to feel like things are mundane or kind of at a standstill, it's important to do it then again, even if it's more often. And so the 7 areas that I really want you to pay attention to in marriage are these: where you're at in quality time, where things look like for respect, having a servant's heart, intimacy, admiration for your spouse, how you communicate, and any resolutions that need to be done, and how you handle conflict. So those 7 areas really have an impact on your marriage and on where your marriage is going and if it's thriving or not. There's certain questions you can ask yourself, certain things you can assess that are going to help you to understand that. I have the link for that in down below for you to download a way to kind of go through questions and see where things are at. So why is it so important? So maybe as you're going through life and you hit autopilot, maybe there are certain areas that are not getting any attention in your marriage. Maybe quality time together has almost disappeared, or maybe intimacy has been gone for quite a while. And these are areas where when we don't take stock or when we're not actively allowing them oxygen to thrive or giving them importance in our marriage, there start to be splinters. Things that are creeping in and causing more of an impact to those areas than maybe we should allow. And occasionally, and more oftentimes than not, and this is where marriages, people go from, I married them and we were in love and things are great, to now I feel like I'm married to a stranger. This is where we end up with the kids have moved out of the house and I don't know who I'm married to. We're completely different people. I don't know how this happened. I don't know them. And so when we aren't assessing these areas and paying any attention, there's little things that creep in and gaps that start to occur that can actually become a large chasm that we no longer know who we're married to. And we drift apart. We start to seek out different things. This is where oftentimes infidelity can come in, or hurt can be caused that we aren't quite sure where it happened, whether it be in our communication, whether it be an unforgiveness that arose, or it is, a conflict that was never dealt with, or maybe there's some things that we either need to seek forgiveness on or need to forgive for. And so when we don't address these areas, we start to allow these splinters to grow. The enemy would like nothing more than to damage your marriage to where it is feeling like it's beyond repair, or feeling like it is coming to a boiling point of breaking apart. And this is why taking inventory is so important, because when you start to take inventory on a regular basis, you're able to see the areas that need addressed before they become problems. If intimacy has been something where you're not connecting for weeks on end, that's an area where you're allowing a opening for the enemy to start navigating some issues, to make it more of a consistent thing, to start leaving where our husbands, who by nature enjoy physical touch, and some women, and they start to wonder if you enjoy them anymore or love them anymore. Or I know when I don't feel like we have a space of a lack of physical intimacy, I start to wonder, is he attracted? Because the enemy is using those kinds of lies to start to nail it, put a wedge in there and start to break open that little splinter and make it bigger and bigger. When we aren't assessing where maybe I've said some hurtful things that I need to seek forgiveness for, I need to go and apologize for, and to deal with. Because when we don't deal with these things, they start to fester and they start to grow. And this is why it's so important. When we take regular stock in our marriage and we inventory, we can see, okay, hey, we haven't really spent a lot of time together. We need to remedy that. We need to make a priority there. Oftentimes we allow kids to take priority over our spouse, and that's not the way God designed it. We come into seasons where, yes, maybe our kids need a little more attention than they do in other seasons, but it's also important to show them from the start that the marriage that we have, that our spouse always comes first, because they cannot have a healthy marriage one day or see the love of Christ in that without us showing it to them first. And so we have to, whether you have to say, hey, you guys are old enough to go play in your room, or you're old enough to go find a way to entertain yourself, this time right here is for mom and dad, uninterrupted. So find something to do while we have our time together. There may be seasons like we have had where our kids are smaller and it's harder during the day. And so when they would go to bed, we'd say, this is your strict bedtime. We're not playing around. We're not going to have this back and forth. You're going to lay down. This time is now mom and dad's. And we would set out either certain days for a certain amount of time where we would spend time together. And we never let it go more than just a few days before we were like, okay, this is our time together. Whether you have to schedule it in or you have to, make a set this day every time this week. Whatever it may be, we have to make sure that we're doing that. Having a servant's heart, and this plays into respect and our desire for intimacy too. How many times are we grumbling anytime our spouse asks a favor of us? Or how many times are we going out of our way to do something to serve them or make their life easier or make their life better? Oftentimes, especially as wives, when we feel like everything is on our shoulders, we tend to feel like, well, they're not doing anything for me, or I'm doing it all already. And I encourage you to pray in those areas that God would soften your heart, but also show your spouse how to love you better, or how to pay more attention in those areas. Ask God to speak to your spouse and give them wisdom on being the husband that God calls them to be. Because when we are not living in obedience, we're responsible for us, not for what they're doing. And so we have to make sure that we're living in obedience in every area. God calls us to serve. And so we have to make sure, am I just nagging and complaining and grumbling anytime they ask me to do something? Am I just saying, oh my gosh, I already do everything else, well, why not? That is a way of, one, you're splintering the communication between you. You're splintering the intimacy, you're splintering respect, and so you're having an impact on so many different things when you're not willing to have a servant heart within your marriage. You can't say you're willing to go serve at church, or you're willing to go serve in the community, you're willing to go volunteer elsewhere joyfully if you're not willing to do it at home as well. It's difficult at times, I know, and there's so many factors that can play an impact, but we have to be conscious of where we are at, and not so much always saying, well, because they didn't, or because they do this, or putting some sort of condition on our obedience to Christ. So I encourage you to really start to take stock in your marriage and start to address the areas that maybe during this season, this is what's this is what's lacking, or this is what's taking the hit, so that you can start to correct it. Within that download that is below, there are also some additional resources to help you really start to look at things and see how you can move forward, things to help you understand different areas, and how to start to cultivate them if you're struggling on how to correct and start to readjust in those areas. I hope this has been helpful and encouraging for you. Taking stock in your marriage is so important, because then it allows you to find more joy and have a more thriving marriage, because you're not letting things get in between you. You're not letting these gaps grow. So until next time, and I hope you have an absolutely fabulous day.